Okay, so now that we have the message import working, so that functionality is correct, and we have the messages being sent in our Firestore database in here, what we will now want to do is get access to the single chat in here from the Firestore database, and then get access to the message recipient details and the message sender details, so we can render the relevant information in both the header and also in the body. So what we can do is get the single chat data from the Firestore database. So we've already done that with the user information. So it's just a case of creating a new function. So if I go into user controller, all I'm doing is accessing the user's collection in here and then passing in the user ID. So all I'm going to do is just copy this and go into my message controller and underneath paste this in. There's a little change we need to make. So it's going to be get single chat from Firestore, and then it's going to be the chat ID that we get in. So all we need to do is replace user ID with chat ID, and then we also need to import get doc, and wherever it says user, it's going to now be chat. So let's command D wherever it says user, and that will be chat. So now essentially that is the function there, which is get a single chat from Firestore. We pass in the chat ID, which is coming from the params, and then we do our check. So if there's no chat ID, then we just want to return and do nothing. Otherwise, we get the access to the chats ref, which is chats/chat ID, which is the chats collection. And then we want to get that doc, which is essentially the ID that we receive from the argument in the function. And then we just want to get the data in here. So that is the function created. So now what we want to do is in our header, so in our main screen header, if we go into here, we now want to get access to that information. So all I want to do is at the top or just under handle close, because this is a client component, we just want to run this on the page load. So we just need a use effect. So use effect. And in here, what I want to do is, first of all, I'm going to put in a comment saying get the chat from Firestore. And then what we want to do is we want to check the user and see if they are the sender or receiver. Before we do any of that, we want to get the chat from Firestore and see if it exists. But it will exist because what we have is routing in the app, where what we do is if we click on the sidebar in our browser, so if we click on this user, it navigates to the relevant user ID in here. So unless you typed in a random piece of text after here, what will happen is you should get a 404 page, which is essentially what we need to configure. So we'll do that next. But for now, I'm just going to go back and leave it as it is. So we want the user avatar in here, and we want the name or the email being added onto here. So let's go ahead and do that. So first of all, we want to get the chat and see if it exists, which it probably will do. So all we need to do is paste in our get single chat from Firestore function, which will take in the argument. So the handy thing with TypeScript is if we hover over it, it tells you here expected one argument but got 0. And in here, you can see that this expects a chat ID of a string, which essentially is the router ID. So we need to fix that. So before we do that, I just want to close off this use effect. And we just want to run it on mount for now, but this will have a dependency of the params ID. So we just need to get the access to the params at the top of the component. So const params is equal to use params once again. And that's coming from next navigation because we are using the client. And then all we do is params.id in here. And we only want to get the single chat from Firestore when the params ID updates. So that's when it should only run. So we pass that in the dependency array in here. And then this get single chat from Firestore is a promise, as you can see here, and it returns document data or undefined. So what we now need to do is chain a .then method onto here. And for each chat, I just want to, first of all, console log the chat and see what that returns. And then what we can also do is do a .catch, and then also just log out the error if there is an error in here. And be more specific, we can do error.message like so. Now, if I save, on the mount of this page, we should get access to whatever the chat is coming from the Firestore database. So now that is saved. So if we go back into the browser, I just want to inspect the console to see what is being returned from this response that we get. And at the top here in main screen header.tsx, we get an object that gets returned, which has the link of ending in CB2, which is essentially this URL here. So we are getting the chat from the Firestore, and in the messages, we have a message array containing all of the messages inside here. So that is fetching the right data correctly. So that's the first part of the function done. So we can now go back into main screen header. And in this block here, so in the .then block, what we now need to do is check the user and see whether they are the sender or receiver. So that is the next thing we need to do. And we can delete this comment out now and move this one up. So you press Alt and up like so. And then in here, what I want to do is create a constant. So this constant will be filter the contact. And what I'm going to do is create a function for this, which is an await function. So in this block here, we also need to make this block async. And in here, I'm going to await for a function that is called handle contact info. So we need to create this function. And in here, what I'm going to do is pass in the chat, which essentially is document data or undefined. So what I'm going to do is copy this. So pass in the chat. And I also want to pass in the params.id. So that is at the top here. So let's pass that in as an argument. So now what we need to do is create this handle contact info function. So let's go ahead and do that. So what I want to do is in my main screen components, I'm going to create a helper file in here so we can get the logic out in a separate place so the component is more lightweight. So helper.ts like so, and then the function is export const handle contact info, which again is an async function. So it takes in the data that I had. So I can paste that in now, which is the chat data. And then also the second argument is going to be the chat ID. So chat ID is going to be a string in here. So now what we need to do is import document data from Firebase. And I just want to close this function off in here. So now what I want to do is log out a comment saying that check if the current user is the same as the chat ID. And if that's the case, what we want to do is get the other user's details because we don't want to show the current user's details in the chat. So if that's the case, then get the other user's details. And then the else block would be get the opposite user's details. So let's handle this. So first of all, we want to do an if check. And the if check is going to be get access to the current user. So auth from firebase dot current user dot uid is equal to chat ID. If it is equal to the chat ID, what we need to do is we want to get the other user's details. So I'm going to declare a constant in here. So const other user. So we can tab this. So other users chat.messages. So if you remember going back to when we was declaring the message object in the chats collection, we had a comment in there. So if you just go back into the message controller, in here, we have a comment saying this is only used for the first index of the array. So essentially, we want to get the recipient details. So when I send the message for the first time, what happens is I'm sending a message to a new user and the chat populates based on the user ID, so the user's UID, and then that gets added to the params object in the URL. So what I need to do is get access to the first index of this message array. So in my helper.ts file, I want to go on to chat.messages.message because we have a message within the messages. And then we want to get access to the first message. And this time, what we want to do is get access to the message sender ID. So that is the other user's ID there. And then I just want to delete this. So now that we've got the message sender ID, that's not enough because we still need more information. So we essentially need the entire user object. So we want to get a single user from that. So we've already defined the function in our user controller, which is get single user from Firestore. So all I want to do is go back in my helper, and then I want to just do a constant again of get other participant, which is equal to await, and then we want to paste in our get single user from Firestore and pass in the other user as the argument in here. And now that should work. So all we now need to do is return the get the other participant in this block. So if we save, so if auth.currentUser.uid is equal to the chat ID, then we want to essentially get the message sender ID. But if it's not, then we just want to do the opposite. So essentially what we could do is copy this block in here and paste that in. But instead of the message sender ID this time, what we want to do, the only difference is the message recipient ID, because it's the opposite, because this time the auth.currentUser.uid is not equal to the chat ID. So essentially we want to get the first message in the chat and we want to pass in that message recipient ID in there. And then we want to fetch the single user and then we want to return the other participant in here. So essentially it's the same function, but it's just checking and it's returning the same value in here. Now there are ways to refactor this, but to keep things simple, I'm just going to keep it as it is for now. And then that will help you understand how to get the other user from the Firestore database in here. So going back into main screen header, we now need to import this function. And now we have the dot then, which returns the filtered contact. And then we are console logging the chat. But what we could do is console log the filtered contact just to see if we get the other user's details. So now if I save this, and now all I need to do is check my browser, and I want to see if I'm getting the other user's details. So if I just refresh the page, as you can see here, something is not working. It's saying undefined in filter contact. So let's go ahead and debug what's going on. So if we go into here and the filter contact isn't working, because what happens is initially when the page loads, it's undefined because this is a promise. So essentially we need to wait for the promise to resolve. So what I'm going to do is create a piece of state and then set that piece of state into the filtered contact in here. So let's go ahead and do that. So in our component at the top, I'm going to create a const called user or contact info, and initially it's going to be null. So once we filter the contact in here, what I want to do is set contact info to the filtered contact, and then all I want to do now is after this use effect console log the contact info, so the piece of state where the contact info lies. So at the minute it's of type any, so the type will be null, or the type will be the contact info, which is an object. So if we hover over this, as you can see here, it's going to be document data or undefined. So let's just copy that and add that in to here. And we also need to import document data from Firebase once again. So now if I save all of this, it should resolve and it will be undefined and then resolve to the contact info. So the filtered contact that we have in here. So now in my browser, what I want to do is refresh the page. So the error comes because the UID coming from the Firebase user here is not the same as the recipient ID over here, because we hard coded this and we manually typed it in. So what we essentially need to do is delete the chat and start again, and then that way the recipient ID and the sender ID would be correct. So what I'm going to do now is shift sideways from this, and where we have this icon here, when we click on it, I'm going to delete the chat from the Firestore database. So essentially what that will do is delete this document in our chats collection. So what I now need to do is create a delete chat function, which is quite simple to do. So where I would put my delete chat function is in the message controller. So in here at the bottom, I'm going to create a new function. So export const of delete chat, which essentially what that's going to do is take in a chat ID, and it's also going to take a router object, because what happens is when we delete a chat, we want to navigate to the home page again. So router, and at the minute it's going to be any, but I believe that will be an app router instance. So we can update this ourselves like so. And then in here, we just need to close the function off. So there's a few things we need to do. So get access to the chat first of all. So const chat ref, which essentially is the same as what we've done above here, which takes in the Firestore and then accesses the chats collection and then accesses the document relevant to the chat ID. Then what we want to do is, instead of a set doc, there's something called a delete doc. So await delete doc, that comes from Firestore as well. So we just need to import that in, place control space and then import. And then all I want to do is console.log the chat has been deleted, and also router.push back to the home page. So essentially that is the delete chat from Firestore function complete. So what I want to do is get access to the icon, which is essentially this delete icon over here. So let's go ahead in our code into our main screen header and find the icon, which essentially is the delete icon on here. And on the icon button which surrounds it, I'm just going to add a non-click, which is equal to delete chat from Firestore, and we need to pass in some arguments. So pass in a callback in here. So what I essentially want to pass in is the params ID, which we have access to up here. So I can paste that in just here. And then we also need the router. So I need to import that in at the top using the use router. So let's go after params const router is equal to use router like so, and import that in from next navigation. So if I now save all, we should have the delete functionality working on the application. So just to double check the Firestore database, we now have one chat in here, which is an array of a few objects of messages. And if I click onto here, this URL should navigate to the home page, and then the chat should delete from this document here as well. So let's press this. And if we go down, you can see here, there's an error here, which is delete chat from Firestore is not defined. So what we need to do is import it in, which we haven't done, and save everything now so that it should work. And now if we press delete, essentially what has happened is we have been navigated back to the home page. So what we need to do is check to see if that chat still exists, which it hasn't now. So it's gone and it's been deleted. So that's fine. So what we now need to do is, going back to what we had previously, is create a new chat. So let's create the chat. We have access to a new chat in here. We now want to say hello Imran in here. Let's enter, and then now we should see this contact info populate. So in our code, we just need to refresh, and now you can see our contact info has been populated. So we're getting the other users information. So now what we can do is use that and render out the UI in the header in here. So let's go ahead and do that. So now if we scroll up, you can see contact info is being rendered out. So we have that piece of state, which is essentially an object. So we can do a conditional check in here. So you can split this out as well, but I'm just going to keep it inside. So contact info in here. If that is true, what we want to do is, so if contact info is true, we want to do a conditional statement. So if it's true, we want to show the user avatar icon that we've defined previously. Otherwise, we want this as a fallback. And I'm just going to bring in a div here of how it should look. So if contact info is true, we want to get access to the user avatar reusable component that we made earlier. And then we just want to get access to the contact info.photo as the image, and the alt is the name. And then we also want the strong tag of email, but what I'll do is I'll just put in the name in here. So now if I just clean this up and save, so essentially what we should have is the information of the opposite user, so the other user in the app. So going into the browser, as you can see here now, the other user, so that's me logged in, and then this is the person I'm talking to, so this is my other email address in here. So that is all set up, and that is everything set on the headers. So we have the delete functionality working. We also have the sign out functionality working. So if I click on here, I should get signed out, and you can see here sign out from WhatsApp, and then I get redirected to the login page. So now what I need to do is sign back in, which again re-authenticates me and signs me back into the home page. And now we have that functionality working. The next step is we need to go into the chat. So if I go into this chat again, we have the user information populating. We now need to get access to the messages from this chat. So we will render that next.